Ever wondered how quickly a society's genetic makeup changes? Or what if I told you an entire region stayed remarkably, well, genetically itself for thousands of years?
Despite being a major crossroads, yeah.
Exactly. Well, get ready to maybe rethink some history today. We're taking a deep dive into an incredible new archaeogenetic study. Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
So this deep dive is based on some really groundbreaking research. We're talking an international team, Germany, Georgia, Armenia, Norway.
Right, under the Max Planck Harvard Research Center for the Archaeoscience of the Ancient Mediterranean. Big names involved, like Johannes Krauss and Philip Stockhammer.
Yeah, exactly. And their work, it's published in Cell, which is, a top journal.
Mm-hmm.
They analyzed ancient DNA from, get this, 230 individuals.
Wow, that's a huge sample size for ancient DNA.
Isn't it? Across 50 different archaeological sites in present-day Georgia and Armenia.
Yeah.
So our mission today really is to pull out the key nuggets from this massive study.
To sort of reconstruct the genetic interactions over time, and even individual movement.
Precisely, looking at population interactions, mobility, the whole picture.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is the sheer scale and the time frame. We're talking early Bronze Age, maybe 3500 BCE.
All the way through to after the migration period, around 500 CE, that's millennia.
It really is, which raises a huge question. How does genetic continuity, like persistence, actually happen in such a dynamic region, a place often seen as this gateway for migrations, cultural exchange?
Right, you'd expect constant change, but here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The primary finding, the most striking one, is that people in the Southern Caucasus kept a mostly constant ancestry profile for 5,000 years.
Mostly constant. That's
So
significant.
it is. Imagine a deeply rooted local gene pool, that's the study's term, just persisting, even through multiple shifts in, say, pottery styles, burial practices, material culture.
Which usually people associate with population change.
Exactly. But here, the underlying genetics stayed remarkably stable.
Yeah, if we put this in context, that level of genetic persistence is, well, the lead geneticist Harald Ringbauer calls it exceptional.
Exceptional compared to where else?
Well, he points out how much this stands out compared to other regions across Western Eurasia, places where big cultural changes were often linked to, substantial movements of people, major migrations.
So this really challenges that idea of constant genetic mixing and replacement, doesn't it?
It certainly complicates it to suggest a different model might be at play in some regions.
So what does this mean for you listening? I mean, it suggests thinking about history maybe less through just grand narratives of invasions and complete population replacements.
And more through the quiet, maybe profound resilience of local communities.
Yeah. What stands out to you about that idea, this incredible genetic endurance in the face of so much external pressure?
It's a powerful counter-narrative.
But, okay, even a stable core can absorb some new influences, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't totally static.
Oh, absolutely not. Well, the overall continuity was the main story. The research did find clear evidence of migration from neighboring regions. It wasn't a closed system.
So what were these first major ripples then? When did new genetic signatures start appearing?
Well, the most significant admixtures, the biggest incoming gene flow, seems to have happened during the later parts of the Bronze Age.
Okay, late Bronze Age. Where from?
A good portion can be traced back to people from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and also from the Eurasian steppe pastoralists to the north.
Ah, the steppe connection. That comes up a lot in ancient DNA.
It does. And importantly, this wasn't just a genetic shift happening in isolation. It coincides with a lot of other changes.
Like what?
Well, things like cultural exchange,
Yeah.
new technologies showing up, think wheels and wagons becoming more common.
Right, mobile pastoralism taking off, maybe?
Exactly. And new burial practices, like those distinctive tumuli or kurgans, those large burial mounds you see across the steppe and into the Caucasus. And shifts in economic systems, too. It all seems interconnected.
Okay, so let's talk language for a second. The study mentions this Bronze Age gene flow from the steppe and connects it or links it to the proposed emergence of the Armenian language, which is, a very old branch of the Indo-European family.
Right, that's a common hypothesis linking steppe ancestry and Indo-European languages.
But then right next door in Georgia, you have the Kartvelian language family, totally different, non-Indo-European. Modern Georgian belongs to this.
And the study found something interesting there, didn't it?
It did. They specifically note seeing more steppe ancestry in Middle and Late Bronze Age Armenia than in Georgia.
Even though Georgia is geographically closer to the North Caucasian steppes.
Exactly, which seems counterintuitive. So what does this distinct pattern mean for theories about how languages spread? Does it suggest steppe ancestry isn't the only factor, or that the process was more complex?
It certainly adds nuance. And it wasn't just the steppe either. They also see this distinct gene flow from Anatolia coming in around the same time.
So not just one source of admixture.
The researchers actually propose two different admixture events shaping the gene pools of Armenia and Georgia separately,
Yeah.
rather than, say, a single wave washing over the whole region.
And does that fit with archaeology?
It seems to. It aligns pretty well with archaeological evidence pointing to numerous Near Eastern cultural influences, especially in things like the Middle-Late Bronze Age Trialeti culture in Georgia.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. That genetic persistence is one thing, but what about cultural practices? This next finding really caught my eye. Intentional cranial deformation.
Ah, yes. The artificially elongated skulls. A striking practice.
Found on early medieval individuals from the Iberian Kingdom, that's present-day Eastern Georgia. Now, this was long thought to be a kind of calling card for Central Eurasian steppe groups, right? Like the Avars and Huns.
That was the prevailing theory, yeah. You find it among those groups, so the assumption was if you see it elsewhere, it must be them or people directly influenced by them.
But what did the DNA show?
Well, here's the fascinating part. The study did find some individuals with deformed skulls who were genetically clearly Central Asian.
Okay, so the link exists.
Yes, and they even found direct genealogical links to the Avars and Huns in a couple of cases. There's one individual, SMT0111.
SMT013.
Yeah, just an identifier. This person had Central Asian ancestry, carried an East Asian mitochondrial haplogroup D4E1, tracing the maternal line, and lived before the Huns are even historically recorded in the North Caucasus. So early connections.
Wow, okay. But that's not the whole story.
Not at all. Because the majority of the individuals they found with these modified skulls were, genetically speaking, locals, not recent migrants.
Mm-hmm.
Their ancestry profiles matched the long-standing Southern Caucasus gene pool.
So what does that mean? The practice arrived, but then...
It seems like a compelling example of cultural adoption. The practice was likely introduced or disseminated by nomadic groups moving through.
But then the local population picked it up and ran with it.
Exactly. Embraced it, continued it. They even found direct evidence of lineal kinship. A mother-daughter pair, both with deformed skulls, both with local ancestry.
A mother-daughter pair, so it wasn't just a random fad, it was being passed down within families.
Seems so, indicating it became quite common, integrated into the local culture, and passed on through genealogical transmission.
That really makes you think, how does a practice like that become so deeply embedded locally, instead of just staying as a marker of an outside group?
It points to a much more nuanced picture of cultural influence, doesn't it? Where traits aren't just imposed, they can be adopted, adapted, given local meaning.
Did they mention specific types of deformation?
They did. They classified them based on the shaping method, annular, which is sort of ring-like constriction,
Right.
tabular, which creates a flatter, perhaps elongated look,
Right.
and circular, for a more generally rounded elongation. So variations within the practice itself.
Fascinating. Okay, let's move forward in time a bit into late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. The picture seems to get even more dynamic then.
Yes, particularly in the emerging urban centers. Historical sources describe places in eastern Georgia, like Mitsketa, the old capital, and Tbilisi, the current one, as real melting pots of people during this period.
Melting pots, so more mixing happening there.
It seems so. You know, historical sources often talk about the Caucasus Mountains acting as both a barrier and a corridor for migration. It could channel movement as well as block it.
Right.
And this study confirms that increased individual mobility was a key feature of the emerging urban centers. People were moving around more, at least into and out of these specific hubs.
Is there genetic evidence for specific groups coming in then?
Yes, they found clear evidence of Sarmatian gene flow, for instance.
Yeah.
Sarmatians were Iranian-speaking nomadic groups from the steppe.
Okay, how much Sarmatian ancestry?
They estimate around 12%, give or take 2%, in Georgia specifically during that transition from late antiquity to the early Middle Ages.
And how does that compare to mobility in other regions at the time?
Well, the study mentions that generally maybe about 7% of historical individuals analyzed across Europe and Southwest Asia tend to show non-local ancestry.
Okay, 7% baseline, sort of.
Roughly. But in the Southern Caucasian urban centers, that figure jumps up to maybe 20%.
20%.
If you also account for mobility from closer neighboring areas, like Anatolia again, or the Northern Caucasus just across the mountains, It really highlights these cities as significant contact zones, crossroads within the crossroads almost.
This study also gives us a really interesting peek into social organization, right? The difference between life in the city versus the countryside.
Yes, a really stark contrast, actually, in terms of genetic patterns.
So what did they find in the urban centers, like Mitskeda?
In Mitskeda, specifically at the large Centaur necropolis, they found the lowest rate of internal IBD segment sharing.
IBD, identity by descent, meaning how much DNA people share from recent common ancestors.
Exactly. Low rates mean less close biological relatedness among the individuals buried there. It suggests a much larger mating pool. People weren't just marrying their close relatives, they were drawing partners from a wider, more diverse population.
Makes sense for a bustling urban center. What about the rural sites?
A very different picture. In places like Kamarakivi and Nedziki, they observed higher rates of IBD segment sharing.
So, more shared ancestry.
Yes, and also elevated amounts of ROH runs of homozygosity. That's long stretches of identical DNA on both chromosomes, often indicating parents were related.
Okay, so what does that pattern suggest?
It's consistent with smaller and partially endogamic communities, meaning people tended to marry within their local group, sometimes even involving close kin unions.
How common was that, the close kin unions?
The study estimates that about 25 to 30% of the individuals analyzed from Georgia showed some genetic evidence of consanguinity, meaning their parents were related, like cousins.
25 to 30%, that sounds high.
It's notably elevated, yes, especially compared to maybe around 3% found in studies of other ancient Eurasian populations.
Right.
So it was a significant feature of rural life in this region, it seems.
Was there anywhere in between? Not quite city, not quite isolated village.
Interestingly, yes. Jinvali, which was known as an important trade hub, sort of on a major route,
Right.
showed an intermediate position. Not as diverse as Mitskeda, but not as much evidence of close kin marriage as the more isolated rural sites.
Which raises a really interesting question then. How did these completely different social structures, this urban diversity on one hand, and this rural endogamy, this marrying within the community, on the other, how do they coexist in the same relatively small region for centuries?
It suggests a complex social landscape, doesn't it? Where different communities had very different practices regarding kinship and marriage, likely tied to their specific economic roles, locations, traditions.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into ancient DNA from the Southern Caucasus, it's clearly not just about tracing who your ancestors were millennia ago.
No, it's much more than that. It's about understanding this incredible complex tapestry of human movement, yes, but also adaptation, cultural exchange, and local persistence.
It really forces us to redefine what continuity even means, especially in a place like the Caucasus, which we usually think of as just this constant crossroads, people coming and going all the time.
And we've seen how the ancient DNA tells a story of, well, remarkable genetic stability at its core.
Right, that 5,000-year constant profile.
But alongside that, distinct waves of external influence coming in, especially during the Bronze Age and later periods, and how cultural practices like the cranial deformation
Yeah, that was fascinating.
could completely transcend genetic origins. A practice comes in from outside, but then becomes deeply embedded in local family traditions. It's not just about genetics dictating culture.
So here's maybe a final thought for you listening to mull over. Given this deep, deep genetic continuity we've seen in the Southern Caucasus over thousands of years, what does that actually imply about the resilience of the local cultures and identities there?
That's a great question. Does it suggest maybe they had some kind of powerful filtering mechanism, allowing cultural exchange, but preserving a core identity?
Or perhaps a really profound capacity for absorption and adaptation, taking in new people, new ideas, but somehow integrating them in a way that maintained their essential character, their core identity, despite all that external exposure.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If some places, some populations are just somehow built to last, genetically and perhaps culturally speaking, even right in the middle of the action.
Something to think about.